They say every soul keeps one prayer locked inside, a single, trembling string of words so dangerous, so uncomfortably honest, that even angels pretend they didn't hear it. And on certain nights, when the candles burn lower than your self-control, and the silence feels like it's watching you back, that prayer rises on its own, like incense no one ordered. You may deny it, of course. Most people do. Self-deception, after all, is the only spiritual practice humanity has mastered without divine assistance. Tonight's story is about that prayer, the one medieval monks never dared whisper, not because it was forbidden, not because it summoned demons or questioned doctrine, but because it was true. And truth, as you already know, is wildly inconvenient. It ruins confidence. It contradicts your best intentions. It never aligns with the pamphlets. Yet we chase it anyway, like moths, auditioning for a flame that has absolutely no interest in hiring. If you're listening to this, perhaps you too are carrying some unspoken petition inside you, folded like a secret note passed to God during a very boring sermon. Maybe you haven't dared open it. Maybe you never will. But there it is, fluttering in your chest like a heretic caught trespassing in his own heart. Before we go any further, before you surrender to the illusion that this is mere background noise, a gentle lullaby crafted to escort you across the fragile wooden bridge into sleep, I must ask something terribly modern of you, a ritual our ancestors could never have imagined, though they certainly would have added it to the liturgy if they'd known it could save their monastery from financial ruin, like the video and subscribe. Do it only if you feel that curious pull in your stomach, the one that could be divine inspiration, existential dread, or indigestion. Who knows? The algorithm works in mysterious ways, often more efficiently than the saints. If this story finds you exactly when you needed it, well, some would call that providence. I call it the recommendation engine nudging your destiny just a little to the left. You decide. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. Imagine a monastery, old enough to creak with every moral compromise ever made within its walls, a place where incense clings to the stones as stubbornly as guilt to the soul. At night, its corridors echo with the sighs of monks who regret having opinions, ambitions, or knees. Candles flicker with passive-aggressive intensity, illuminating dust that has absolutely no intention of leaving. The air is thick with prayer, or maybe just humidity pretending to be holy. It was in such a place that our story unravels, one hesitant thread at a time. But before we introduce our protagonist, let me ask you something no monk would dare say aloud. Have you ever noticed how the holier someone tries to appear, the more suspicious their silence becomes, as if heaven were taking attendance, and they're praying just loudly enough to be counted, but not loudly enough to reveal anything of substance? Faith, in this world, is a theater of whispers. Everyone is murmuring something vague into the darkness, hoping the darkness is in a good mood. And this is where tonight's unraveling begins. Our tale does not start with lightning or visions, or celestial trumpets blasting unsolicited announcements. No, it begins with something far more subtle, more human, an unease, a gentle dread, a sense that truth is standing politely behind you, tapping its foot, waiting to be acknowledged. You know that feeling, the one that arrives when the room goes quiet enough for your thoughts to grow bold, when your soul decides to hold a meeting without consulting you first. This is the feeling that visited Brother Alistair on a night he would later describe as perfectly ordinary, except for the part where my faith attempted to resign. Ah, but I am getting ahead of myself. For now, picture him, a monk of solemn posture and uncertain convictions, kneeling in the chapel long after everyone else has given up on being devout for the day. His robe hangs from his shoulders like a wet cloud. His fingers trace the rosary with mechanical obedience. His lips move more out of habit than devotion, like someone repeating a familiar lie, not because they believe it, but because it's been working surprisingly well. He whispers the standard prayers, for mercy, for wisdom, for forgiveness from sins he cannot remember committing. And deep below those murmured lines, so far buried even the clergy couldn't extract it, lies that forbidden prayer, the one no monk dares speak, not even to themselves, the one that would unravel everything, like pulling the wrong thread on a tapestry and watching the entire image collapse into a pile of confused colors. Tonight, as the shadows lengthened like overworked scribes, Something unusual stirred in Brother Alistair's chest. A small rebellion, a whisper craving a voice, a question he wasn't ready to ask. Because asking God questions is easy. Listening to the answer is, well, a different profession entirely. To understand what was about to unfold, you must settle into the rhythm of the monastery. Slow, candlelit, echoing with chants that always sound meaningful until you actually try to translate them. You must feel the stone floor beneath bare feet, cold enough to make doubt seem warm in comparison. You must inhale the incense that burns not for beauty, but because ritual demands smoke even when the heart does not. Take a moment. Breathe in with the monks. Smell the wax melting like time itself. Hear the distant cough of someone trying to be holy through respiratory difficulty. Let the silence wrap around you like a forgotten vow. And now, lean closer. Closer still. Because tonight's story is not loud. It does not shout miracles or proclaim revelations with theatrical flair. It whispers. It hums. It tiptoes along the spine of your mind, leaving a trail of questions that feel almost, but not quite, safe. Brother Alistair, as he knelt in the flickering light, did not expect anything unusual to happen. Spiritual surprises are rarely scheduled. But something shifted. A tremor in his prayer, a hesitation in his breath, a suspicion, faint, nearly polite, that he had been talking to heaven for years, and heaven had either A. muted the notifications, or B. been busy sorting cosmic paperwork. And then, like a candle guttering before revealing its last ounce of light, a thought flashed. What if the prayer heaven truly listens to is the one you're too afraid to say? The moment he sensed this question rising inside him, he did what any responsible monk would do. He ignored it entirely. After all, nothing strengthens faith quite like pretending it isn't cracking. A chill slid down the corridor behind him, though the windows were closed. The candles shivered. Dust drifted like forgotten confessions escaping their shelves. And in that trembling atmosphere, the monastery itself seemed to lean in, curious, as though it too longed to hear the prayer no monk dared whisper. But of course, Brother Alistair did not speak it. Not yet. Not even close. For now, all he had was an uneasiness, the kind you feel when life nudges you and whispers, "Pay attention," but refuses to explain why. You have felt that too. Everyone has. It is the prelude to every spiritual crisis and every poorly timed epiphany. What Brother Alistair didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that this subtle disturbance, this fragile tremor of doubt, would lead him down a path of signs, misinterpretations, monastic confusion, divine misunderstandings, and the kind of philosophical spirals that make sleep both impossible and irresistible. But every long story begins with a moment so quiet you could mistake it for nothing at all. And this was that moment. The chapel had grown colder, the shadows had grown braver, and Brother Alistair's heart, without consulting him, had begun drafting a prayer he feared would change everything, if he ever found the courage, or the desperation, to speak it aloud. You, listening now, can feel the shift too, the way the air thickens before revelation, the way truth circles you, soft-footed, waiting. You may not know it yet, but you and Brother Alistair are already walking the same dim corridor, carrying the same fragile question, avoiding the same truth, and if you stay with this story long enough, you may discover that his forbidden prayer is not so different from your own. But for tonight, for this first whisper in the dark, we remain with the unease, the hush, the trembling of a prayer not yet spoken. The candles flicker, the dust listens, and somewhere deep inside Brother Alistair's weary soul, a door he never meant to open, sighs. If dawn had a sense of humor, it would look exactly like the mornings in St. Corvinus Monastery, pale, half awake, and mildly disappointed in everyone. Light seeped through the narrow windows with the enthusiasm of a tax collector, illuminating dust motes that floated around as if they were retired saints refusing to leave the premises. Somewhere, a raven croaked with the confidence of a creature that had never once apologized for anything, a trait many monks secretly envied. And in the middle of this austere comedy of holiness lived Brother Alistair. Not that he had chosen the monastic life. Few did. Some were abandoned to monasteries as infants, others arrived as penitents seeking salvation, and a select few simply misread the recruitment posters. Alistair, well, he fell into none of these categories. He had simply drifted into the monastery, like an inconvenient thought no one remembered having. The first thing you must know about him is that he prayed often. The second thing you must know is that he prayed mostly out of habit. And the third thing, perhaps the most important, is that habit, when practiced long enough, can look suspiciously like devotion, especially from a distance. Each morning, while the other monks shuffled around like exhausted saints awaiting retirement, Alistair found himself lingering in the courtyard. He enjoyed the quiet, the soft crunch of gravel beneath sandals, the faint echo of chanting escaping through wooden doors, the cold breath of dawn brushing his face like a reminder that the world was still unfinished. He liked unfinished things. Finished ones left no room for interpretation, and interpretation, he discovered early, was where faith lived comfortably, like a cat sleeping on contradictions. The monastery sat on a hill overlooking a village so small it barely had enough gossip to sustain itself through the winter. Its inhabitants were devout in the way most people are devout. They believed strongly, questioned rarely, and sinned responsibly. They attended Mass with admirable consistency, not because they feared hell, but because the pews were more comfortable than the benches in the tavern. Alistair often observed them from the battlements, pretending to meditate on the suffering of saints while secretly cataloguing the villagers' hypocrisies. He took great comfort in them. Hypocrisy, after all, was proof that humans were trying, fumbling, stumbling, but trying, to reach something greater than themselves, or at least greater than their neighbors. Inside the monastery, life unfolded with ritual precision. Bells were rung with military punctuality, even if the monk responsible for ringing them frequently forgot what day it was. Bread was baked daily, with a texture best described as penitential. The library smelled of old pages and older opinions. And the chapel, the chapel. It was the sentimental heart of the monastery, where candles dripped wax like weeping saints, and the altarpiece stared at you with the passive-aggressive judgment of someone who knows exactly how often you've doubted. This was Alistair's world, cathedral of contradictions wrapped in silence and smoke. He walked through it daily, his robe whispering against the cold stone floors, trailing behind him like misplaced humility. He moved with the slow purposefulness of someone trying to look devout, without exerting unnecessary effort. His hands often carried parchment, not because he needed it, but because monks holding parchment are automatically perceived as holy, or at least busy. His mornings followed a familiar routine: wake before dawn, though not intentionally, stumble into the chapel for matins, whispering prayers with the vigor of someone reciting a script they only half believe. Contemplate existential dread. Pretend not to contemplate existential dread. Help in the scriptorium by copying texts he occasionally, accidentally, improved with sarcasm. Return to the courtyard to watch the world ignore him. He was beloved by some, tolerated by most, and feared by none, which is perhaps why heaven seldom bothered to intervene in his affairs. Intervention, as divine beings surely know, is most effective when people have the emotional range to appreciate it. Alistair's emotional range, however, was more suited for contemplative sighing and quiet existential collapse. There was, however, something different about him, a small, stubborn ember in his chest. Not quite hope, not quite curiosity, something in between, like a question waiting for permission to exist. And though he didn't know it yet, that question was already growing restless. But at this stage, at this peaceful, deceptively simple beginning, you would never guess that Brother Alistair was destined to unravel. He carried himself with the weary grace of a man who believed in the importance of belief itself, even when he wasn't entirely convinced by its content. He would walk past relics displayed under dusty glass, nodding respectfully as if greeting old friends he never truly understood. He participated in chants with the enthusiasm of a man reading terms and conditions he has no intention of following. He fasted during holy days with admirable dedication, though mostly because he kept forgetting when meals were served. Irony permeated nearly everything he did, but gently, like a spice sprinkled by a distracted chef. He loved God with the cautious affection of someone who wasn't sure if God was listening or merely being polite. He feared hell in the same way one fears bad weather, aware of its possibility, resigned to whatever happens, and mildly annoyed when it arrives. And yet, beneath all of that, There was sincerity, a quiet one, a humble one, a sincerity that did not announce itself or glow with saintly grandeur, a sincerity that whispered rather than proclaimed. This is what made him dangerous, not to the world, never to the world, but to himself, because sincerity, when mixed with curiosity, becomes volatile, and curiosity, when mixed with faith, becomes explosive. And explosions, particularly spiritual ones, have a tendency to uncover truths no one asked for. Still, nothing in Alistair's demeanour hinted at impending crisis. He looked like a monk whose greatest challenge would be staying awake during evening prayer, not confronting cosmic uncertainty. His eyes were calm, always observing, always slightly amused at the absurdity of human devotion. His posture was that of a man who had accepted that life was a long hallway of unanswered questions and creaky doors. Speaking of creaky doors, the monastery had many. They groaned and complained like old men discussing the weather. Every time Alistair passed through one, he felt as though it were warning him, "Turn back. You're heading toward revelation, and revelation is terribly inconvenient." He never listened. But then again, neither do you. You, too, are walking through such doors every day. Steps that feel ordinary, choices that feel insignificant, moments that feel like nothing at all, until later, when you realize they were the silent beginnings of something immense. That is how Brother Alistair lived his life, unaware that every breath, every hesitation, every ironic prayer was guiding him toward the moment when his faith would begin to tremble. But not yet. For now he remained a humble observer of holy chaos. Every afternoon he spent time in the scriptorium, a place so quiet it made silence look noisy. Quills scratched against parchment like nervous insects. Monks hunched over desks as though trying to pray their way out of back pain. Dust gathered patiently on neglected manuscripts, forming alliances with cobwebs. Alistair loved it there, not because he enjoyed copying scripture, he didn't, not because he felt inspired by ancient wisdom, he often didn't, but because the scriptorium offered something rare, the illusion of productivity. Nothing comforts a conflicted soul more than the sense of doing something meaningful, even when one isn't sure what meaning is. He would dip his quill into ink, take a slow breath, and begin transcribing passages so carefully one might mistake him for a devoted scholar. Yet his thoughts drifted constantly, sometimes toward God, sometimes toward doubt, occasionally toward the possibility of stealing a loaf of bread and escaping into the woods to live as a hermit philosopher, a fantasy he abandoned quickly due to his poor sense of direction and dislike of insects. But beneath all the drifting thoughts, beneath the quiet humor and gentle detachment, a tension was forming, a subtle tightening of the soul, a question circling like a cautious wolf around the edges of his consciousness. The other monks noticed nothing. They never do. People rarely notice anything unless it inconveniences them directly. To them, Alistair was simply Alistair, a monk among monks. Another voice in the choir, sometimes flat, but never disruptive. Another pair of hands in the kitchen, usually chopping vegetables with contemplative slowness. Another warm body filling the pews during evening mass. Nothing remarkable, nothing dangerous, nothing that could foreshadow the night he would nearly unravel the universe by accident, or so it felt. But every crisis, as any philosopher will tell you, begins long before it becomes visible. It grows silently, like ivy creeping up a stone wall, unnoticed until it has already claimed the architecture. For now, though, Brother Alistair remained unaware of his own impending undoing. He walked the monastery halls with untroubled steps, humming chants he barely understood, offering small prayers for ailments he didn't quite believe God took seriously. He lived simply. He lived quietly. He lived, above all, ironically. And yet, in quiet corners of his mind, the places he avoided during prayer, something whispered, something waited, something wondered whether faith was meant to expand or collapse under pressure. This whisper was not yet a threat, not yet a revelation, not yet the forbidden prayer clawing its way toward the surface, but it was the beginning, a beginning subtle enough to escape notice, a beginning so gentle it felt like nothing at all. And as every monk knows, though few admit it, nothing is the most dangerous thing in the world. It holds space for everything. Before Brother Alistair unraveled, before the quiet cracks in his soul began widening like poorly maintained monastery walls. His faith existed in a state best described as pleasantly delusional. Not delusional in the dangerous sense, no. More in the way a person believes a grocery store discount applies to all items, even though there is always fine print. His belief was enthusiastic enough to look impressive, but flexible enough to avoid actual commitment. If someone had asked him then, "Brother Alistair, what is faith to you?" he would have smiled in that serene monastic way that implies depth, even when none is present, and answered, "Faith is trusting that someone, preferably God, is paying attention." Of course, he never questioned whether God wanted to pay attention. That part he left politely unexamined, like a suspicious food offering from a parishioner whose hygiene was more aspirational than functional. In truth, Alistair's faith was a tapestry woven of contradictions so skillfully knotted that he rarely tripped over them. It was warm, comforting, soft around the edges, faith made not from certainty, but from habit, hope, and the deeply human tendency to believe whatever keeps the spiritual weather pleasant. He believed in miracles the way people believe in morning coffee, because without the idea of it, life feels unnecessarily bleak. He believed heaven had a plan for him, though he hoped the plan involved frequent naps and minimal martyrdom. He believed God loved him, the same way he believed gravity would keep working. He didn't understand how or why, but it seemed rude to question something that had not malfunctioned recently. And most importantly, he believed. His doubts were ornamental, decorative, an aesthetic accessory to his inner monastic life. After all, what is a monk without a pinch of existential crisis? A peasant with a robe. Yet Alistair's crises were manageable, small enough to tuck beneath daily rituals, harmless enough to drown in incense. And so he lived comfortably in the space between devotion and uncertainty, what philosophers call contemplation, and what everyone else calls avoiding the issue. To him, faith was not a mountain to climb, but a warm blanket to hide under. Yes, the blanket had holes. Yes, the blanket occasionally caught fire from nearby candles. Yes, the blanket had never once answered a prayer directly. But still, it was his blanket. He loved the feeling of belief, not belief itself. He loved rising before dawn to join the chorus of sleepy voices chanting into the stone vaults. He loved the way sound echoed and made even the shyest monk seem spiritually intimidating. He loved the way candlelight painted halos on everyone, even Brother Matthias, who snored during prayer with impunity and somehow holiness. He loved how faith wrapped the world in an elegant narrative, a cosmic bedtime story with moral lessons, celestial characters, and the comforting assertion that even misery had purpose if you squinted hard enough. Truly, Alistair adored religion the way one adores a beautifully bound book, whose plot one has never actually read. His faith was also deeply practical, another trait he inherited from the monastery environment. For example, if he misplaced something, he prayed. If he found it, he thanked God. If he didn't, he blamed demons. This was easier than admitting he simply lacked organizational skills. If a ritual soothed him, he considered it holy. If it didn't, he assumed he was performing it incorrectly. Never once did he consider that the ritual might simply be boring, and when he didn't understand a passage of scripture, he interpreted it metaphorically. Every passage was metaphorical, especially the confusing ones, especially the contradictory ones, especially the ones that made him uncomfortable. He believed with poetic sincerity that God had a great sense of irony. Why else would humans exist? Why else would prayer feel like talking to someone who occasionally leaves the room? Why else would the holiest men snore the loudest? Alistair did not see irony as an enemy of faith. He saw it as proof that faith was alive, unruly, beautifully disobedient. His favorite thought was this: if certainty were possible, there would be no need for candles. He imagined heaven full of candles, some lit, some half-melted, some lost entirely. He imagined angels collecting wax from the faithful, crafting constellations from prayers that never quite reached the sky. He imagined God receiving petitions like letters addressed to the wrong kingdom, smiling at the effort, even when the content was absurd. Yes, his faith was warm. Yes, his faith was poetic. Yes, his faith was fragile. But fragile things can be beautiful, and fragile things can be dangerous. especially when someone, intentionally or not, taps just the right spot. Alistair's earliest memories of belief were simple, almost charming in their innocence. He remembered staring at stained-glass saints as a child, marveling at their serene expressions, completely unaware that artists often depicted saints as calm because they didn't know how to draw anxiety convincingly. He remembered thinking candles were tiny suns assigned to lonely corners of the earth. He remembered believing monks lived forever. He remembered assuming God was a kindly old man who spent most of his time trying to sort through prayers like a bureaucrat drowning in celestial paperwork. But age transforms faith into something heavier. As he grew older, prayer became less about comfort and more about maintenance, like dusting shelves, or watering plants, or pretending one understands philosophy because nodding is easier than admitting confusion. Alistair prayed to stay in shape, spiritually, of course, like a jogger who dislikes running but fears mortality. His faith before the crisis was wide but shallow. It covered everything but never deeply. It soothed, but it did not interrogate. It warmed, but it did not illuminate. It was, in many ways, the perfect form of faith for a monk who wanted to survive monastic life without ever achieving sainthood or scandal, a respectable middle ground. He believed God saw him, but not too closely. He believed angels guarded him, but only during business hours. He believed hell existed, but primarily for other people. He believed heaven was merciful, but inconsistently. He believed prayer worked, but only when he didn't need it urgently. In his quieter moments, those soft candlelit pockets of time when monks feel especially profound, he would whisper prayers not for salvation or wisdom, but for something else entirely. Lord, grant me clarity, or at least enough confusion to avoid making definitive claims. It was an honest prayer. It was also a safe one. Nothing changes when you ask for nothing in particular. And so, Alistair drifted through his days like incense smoke, graceful, fragrant, and vaguely pointless. Yet beneath all of this, a tiny seed of doubt already existed. Not a threatening seed, not an urgent seed, just a small, politely whispered question. What if everything I believe is almost true? Almost. The most dangerous word in theology. Almost true means something is beautiful, but incomplete. Comforting, but flawed. Functional, but inaccurate. It means you can live your whole life believing it, and one small tremor, one dream, one sign, one badly timed epiphany can send the whole structure swaying. But at this point in our story, Alistair did not know that, or pretended not to know. He believed his faith was stable enough to withstand any crisis, and why wouldn't he? His days were peaceful, his doubts were manageable, his prayers were regular, his soul felt moderately clean. That is the danger of feeling fine. Every collapse begins with the illusion of stability. Alistair's faith before it shattered was a beautiful mosaic, ironic, poetic, comforting, shining only because no one had yet dared to touch it. But soon, so very soon, something would disturb that mosaic. A whisper, a sign, a dream, a question that refused to remain unanswered. And when it came, his faith, pleasant, fragile, ornamental, would tremble for the first time. Doubt, contrary to popular belief, does not arrive like a thunderbolt or a divine memo stamped urgent. It enters quietly, politely, like an apologetic guest who insists they won't stay long, right before rearranging all the furniture in your soul. For Brother Alistair, the seed of doubt did not come with flames or visions or dramatic signs involving celestial trumpets. No, it began, as all meaningful spiritual crises do, with something profoundly underwhelming. A conversation, a strange one, the kind that feels harmless in the moment, but later grows claws. It happened on an evening when the monastery seemed especially theatrical. Candles flickered as though auditioning for roles in a cosmic play. Shadows stretched themselves against the walls, looking smug, like creatures who knew secrets they weren't obligated to share. And Brother Alistair, after a day spent transcribing a sermon that contradicted itself twice in the same paragraph, felt unusually contemplative. He walked into the cloister garden, which always smelled faintly of rosemary, earth, and the regrets of monks who dreamed of other lives. There he found Brother Remiel, the oldest monk in St. Corvinus, not praying, not meditating, but talking to a statue, not an impressive statue, not even a symbolic one, just a chipped stone angel with one wing broken off and a face that looked perpetually unimpressed. Alistair, ever polite in the face of absurdity, approached quietly. "Brother Remiel," he whispered, "are you speaking to the statue?" Remiel did not turn. "Of course not, Alistair. That would be ridiculous." The angel statue stared forward with the expression of someone who had witnessed too many confessions and no longer cared. "I am speaking," Remiel continued, "to the silence around it." Alistair blinked, a reasonable response to nonsense. "And does the silence answer?" "Oh, yes," Remiel said with unsettling cheerfulness. "Silence always answers. It just never says what you want it to." Alistair shifted uncomfortably, feeling the first flutter of unease. "And what does it say to you?" Remiel leaned closer to the statue, as though sharing a secret. "Tonight," it said, "everything you believe is true." "Well," Alistair said slowly, "surely that's comforting." Remiel chuckled. "Ah, but yesterday it said, everything you believe is false, and the day before that it said something even worse. Everything you believe is irrelevant." The silence of the garden tightened around them like an unspoken ritual. "And which one do you think is correct?" Alistair asked. Remiel inhaled the night air deeply. "That depends entirely on what I want to avoid thinking about." And then he walked away, humming softly, leaving Alistair alone with a broken statue, a confused mind, and the uncomfortable suspicion that he had just received very poor spiritual guidance. It would have been easy, comforting even, to dismiss Remiel's words as the eccentric ramblings of a man who had been in the monastery too long, but the thought lingered, clung, whispered, an invasive species in the garden of his mind. Could truth really shift depending on avoidance? Could belief be both true and false? Could silence be more talkative than prayer? He shook his head, as though dislodging a mosquito, or a destiny. But the seed had landed. Later that night, during Vespers, the seed received water. The monks were chanting, a low, melodic drone designed to lull even the most attentive mind into a state of peaceful indifference. The chapel smelled of melting wax, cold stone, and the faint bitterness of incense that had burned too long. Alistair sang his part as usual, his voice drifting among the others like a candle in a draught. But for the first time in years, he listened, not to the music, not to the monks, but to the voice in his head asking, "What exactly are we doing?" A dangerous question, more dangerous than heresy, more dangerous than sin. What exactly are we doing? A question that revealed how much of monastic life rested not on spiritual clarity, but on spiritual choreography. Stand, sit, kneel, chant, repeat until mortality intervenes. And beneath all that ritual, what? Meaning? Purpose? Silence? He tried to refocus on the chant. He tried to feel the familiar comfort. He tried to sink into devotion. Instead, he noticed the absurdity. 30 grown men humming ancient poetry in a stone vault, hoping the universe, busy, chaotic, ungovernable, was tuning in. He almost laughed, a quiet, sinful, existentially exhausted laugh, but he held it in. Barely. The seed sprouted. Still, doubt is not content with a single disturbance. It prefers to stack itself, layer by layer, like a philosophical millefeuille. So the universe, being either extremely attentive or extremely mischievous, offered him a second sign, a dream. Dreams, as every monk knows, are unreliable, half divine message, half digestive complaint. But this dream felt unusually vivid. He stood in the chapel alone, candles burning, shadows trembling, a sense of holy anticipation thick in the air. A voice, not God's, but something far more irritating, whispered, "Ask the question." He froze. What question? The one you're avoiding. He waited. He trembled. He tried to recall every theological principle that strictly prohibited speaking with disembodied voices. And then the voice said gently, "You already know." He opened his mouth to respond, but the candles suddenly went out, all at once, and the darkness collapsed around him like a robe dropped to the floor. He woke up gasping, soaked in sweat, gripping his blanket as though it were his last remaining belief. He sat upright in his narrow cot, listening to the nocturnal symphony of snores from the dormitory hall. His heart pounded, his breath stuttered. His mind replayed the dream with the persistence of scripture and the confusion of bad poetry. "What question?" he whispered into the dark. The dark, as usual, offered no clarification. But the doubt, the small, determined seed, had now grown roots. Over the next days, odd little signs began finding him. Not mystical signs, no. No stigmata, no writing on walls, no burning bushes making divine small talk. These were simpler, pettier, more ironic signs. First, a manuscript he was copying fell open to a page where the text abruptly contradicted itself. Not subtly, boldly, theological whiplash. He stared at it, quill dripping ink, wondering if truth always needed footnotes. Second, during prayer, he accidentally intoned a line from a completely different chant, a heretical remix. No one noticed. He wondered if God noticed. He wondered if God cared. Third, a piece of bread at supper was burnt so badly that the charred surface resembled a face. Saint Apollonius, perhaps, or the baker, or possibly Alistair's own reflection. Hard to tell. Brother Matthias swore it was a sign of divine displeasure. Brother Corvinus insisted it was a sign of divine humour. Brother Cedric took the bread and ate it, declaring it a sign of divine hunger. Alistair simply stared at the burnt face of bread, thinking, if this is a sign, heaven has either run out of ideas or started outsourcing. But doubt rarely makes sense in the moment. It accumulates quietly, a soft, steady dripping on the stone floor of the soul. Drip, the contradictory manuscript. Drip, the dream. Drip, the burnt bread saint. Drip, Remiel talking to statues. Drip, the silence answering questions no one asked. And maybe the strangest part was this. Nothing was significant enough to matter, yet nothing was insignificant enough to ignore. Doubt thrives in ambiguity. It doesn't need clarity. It needs pattern. And the pattern, though faint, was forming. Late one evening, as Alistair swept the chapel floor, a task he found both meditative and demeaning, his broom caught on a crack in the stone. Something small and brittle tumbled out. A fragment of parchment, yellowed, delicate, nearly obliterated by time. He lifted it with cautious fingers. Only one line remained legible. "The prayer you fear to speak is the only one heaven hears." His breath froze. His fingers trembled. Somewhere behind him a candle flickered violently. This was no dream, no overheard rambling, no burnt carbohydrate saint. This was a message, or at least close enough to one for the mind to behave badly. "What prayer?" he whispered. No answer. Only the long, slow exhale of the chapel walls settling into silence. But the seed, small, harmless, unintentional, had now split open. Something inside it was growing, something that would not let him rest, or chant, or pray, or believe as he had before. What prayer was he afraid to speak? And why did heaven, or silence, or destiny, or coincidence, seem so intent on hearing it? The first rule of spiritual crisis, as any monastery veteran will tell you, is simple. Pretend it isn't happening. Nothing terrifies a devout community more than self-awareness. Doubt, especially intelligent doubt, is like mold. If you ignore it, it spreads. If you acknowledge it, it spreads faster. Brother Alistair knew this instinctively, the way birds know how to migrate and monks know how to suppress emotional complexity. And so, after discovering the strange parchment fragment and experiencing a week of suspicious coincidences, he resolved to do the most logical thing a trembling soul can do: become aggressively devout. Not sincerely devout. That would require clarity. Not quietly devout. That would invite thought. No, he chose the third option: performance-level devout. Theatrically devout. Devout with the subtlety of a choir exploding. He began by praying louder. Not too loud, of course. He didn't want to be escorted for excessive piety, which had happened twice before in monastery history, but louder enough to signal to the universe, to the angels, and to any nearby doubting demons: "I am absolutely fine." He elongated his chants, added flourish to his Amen, used extra flourishes in his sign of the cross as though tracing divine geometry. He even tried smiling while praying, a completely unnatural act that made Brother Matthias look at him suspiciously. It didn't help that he whispered prayers at double speed, like someone racing to finish a script before forgetting his lines. But that was only the beginning. The rituals. Oh, the rituals. Where before he had genuflected with casual adequacy, now he genuflected with the gusto of a man trying to impress an audience that did not exist. His kneeling became an acrobatic endeavor. His bowing achieved levels of curvature previously unseen outside advanced yoga. During morning mass, he clasped his hands so tightly that the novice beside him asked if he was trying to wring out his sins like wet laundry. "No," Alistair said gently, "just embracing devotion." In truth, he was attempting to strangle doubt before it grew legs. He began fasting more often, not out of penitence, but out of panic, a spiritually cornered animal. He doubled his hours of copying manuscripts, though the pages he produced were filled with shaky handwriting and occasional existential scribbles, such as, "God, are you awake? Ignore this. I am not doubting. Please do not perceive me." In the courtyard, he walked with exaggerated serenity, the kind of serenity that looks suspiciously like internal screaming. He even initiated conversations with relics, casually, of course, just to demonstrate to any invisible observers that he was still a functional believer. "Good morning, skull of St. Florian," he murmured respectfully one day. "Lovely weather. Hope the afterlife is treating you well." He nodded politely. The skull said nothing. He took that as encouragement. Then came the night he truly overdid it. It was during Compline, the final prayer of the day, when monks were supposed to settle into humble, introspective silence. The chapel was dim, lit by thin candles trembling in their sconces. Shadows curled like secret thoughts around the altar. Brother Alistair decided that tonight, yes, tonight, he would demonstrate unwavering devotion so convincingly that even heaven, which had been suspiciously quiet recently, would have no choice but to believe him. The chanting began softly, a gentle river of breath flowing through the stone vaults. Alistair inhaled deeply, preparing for his moment. And then he began praying with an enthusiasm so suspicious, so disproportionate, that even the statues seemed to turn their heads. His voice soared, his arms lifted dramatically, his eyes glistened with manufactured piety. "Lord," he intoned, "guide us, protect us, illuminate our path." He was glowing with religious determination. He was radiant with artificial zeal. He was a theological torch. He was also sweating profusely. Brother Matthias whispered, "Is he auditioning for sainthood?" Brother Corvinus whispered back, "If he is, it's too much." But Alistair wasn't done. He extended his prayer, adding unscripted requests, dangerous improvisational requests. "Cleanse our doubts," he declared. "Not that I have any, of course, just hypothetically. For others, other people." Several monks turned slowly. Remiel raised an eyebrow. Even the candles leaned away as if uncomfortable. Alistair continued with increasing desperation. "And strengthen our faith, especially for those who feel no tremors of uncertainty whatsoever, like myself, who stands before you completely stable, solid, unshakable, like a metaphysical boulder." Brother Cedric coughed pointedly. Brother Matthias muttered, "He's not okay." Brother Remiel whispered, "Oh, the crisis has begun." "Excellent." Alistair finally realized he had gone too far when the abbot, a man known for his spiritual patience, cleared his throat with the soft authority of someone who has witnessed monks do many strange things, but draws the line at overzealous monastic theatre. "Brother Alistair," the abbot said gently, "perhaps breathe." Alistair nodded with exaggerated reverence. "Of course, Father. Breathing. Yes, breathing is holy." He proceeded to inhale so dramatically that one of the novices flinched. After that, he forced himself to calm down, to slow, to appear normal, which, of course, made everything worse. Because denial, as the universe knows, is the most visible disguise. In the days that followed, Alistair doubled his efforts. He cleaned the chapel floors twice. He polished candlesticks until he could see his spiritual despair reflected in them. He volunteered for chores no one wanted, like organizing the reliquary, or listening to Brother Cedric's hour-long allegories about mustard. He overperformed humility so aggressively that it bordered on pride. "Brother Alistair," said the abbot during one afternoon inspection, "you don't need to bow every time someone speaks to you. Humility strengthens the soul, Alistair replied, bowing again. Yes, but too much humility undermines the knees. He bowed a third time. Understood. He later bowed alone in the corridor for 30 additional minutes, just in case heaven was keeping score. All the while his mind whispered, if I act devout enough, the doubt will retreat. If I pretend hard enough, the universe won't notice that something inside me is trembling. If I pray loudly enough, perhaps God will think I still believe exactly as before. This is a classic tactic, beloved by believers of every century. A spiritual smokescreen, a way of saying, don't look at me, Lord, I'm fine. Don't look too closely. Don't see the hairline cracks. And the funniest part? While Alistair was busy trying to deceive heaven, heaven, if it was watching, must have been chuckling, because no one hides their soul more poorly than someone trying very hard to hide their soul. Still, he persisted. Still, he performed. Still, he insisted his faith was intact, flawless, gleaming. But denial does not stop a crisis. Denial nourishes it, and the more he clung to ritual, the heavier the doubt became, pressing, thickening, stirring beneath his ribs. By the end of the week, Alistair was holding himself together with little more than incense fumes and sheer willpower. One night, as he forced himself into extra prayers before sleep, he whispered, I am fine. The walls did not agree. The silence did not agree. His trembling hands did not agree. And somewhere deep inside, where the forbidden prayer waited patiently, a small voice said, you are not fine, and soon you will stop pretending. One of the great misunderstandings about the divine is the assumption that signs, true signs, meaningful signs, arrive with clarity. People imagine heavenly messages descending like royal decrees, stamped with celestial certainty, framed in radiant beams of holy efficiency. This has never been the case. In reality, signs are ambiguous, unhelpful, occasionally insulting, and often resemble coincidences wearing cheap disguises. The universe, if it communicates at all, does so with the vague enthusiasm of an oracle who just woke up from a nap. Brother Alistair was about to discover this firsthand. By now, his denial was cracking. His exaggerated devoutness had reached such theatrical heights that even the monastery cat began avoiding him. Yet he remained convinced that the universe, perceptive, wise, omnipotent, would eventually send him a clear message. The universe, being the universe, did not. Instead, it sent him things, small, strange, irritating things, signs that meant absolutely nothing or absolutely everything, depending entirely on how sleep-deprived he was. The first unhelpful sign arrived on a Tuesday morning, a day so dull that even the sun rose reluctantly. Alistair entered the scriptorium, ready to copy another sermon about the virtues of obedience, a topic he increasingly found suspicious. But as he dipped his quill into ink, a small feather drifted from the rafters and landed squarely on his manuscript. White, soft, perfectly centered. A sign, or lint. He wasn't sure. He looked up slowly, half expecting an angel to be lounging on the ceiling beams. Instead, he found a pigeon, fat, indifferent, and possibly divine only in its confidence. The pigeon cooed dismissively and defecated on a centuries-old theological text. Alistair stared in horror. Is this symbolic?" he whispered. Brother Matthias crossed the room, saw the mess, nodded solemnly and said, "Yes, it means you should close the window. So much for celestial intervention." The second unhelpful sign came during lunch. Soup, thin, grey, emotionally defeated, was being ladled into bowls. The monks sat in dignified silence, as though pretending the meal tasted like anything other than sadness. Alistair lifted a spoonful, blew gently, and then froze. Floating in the broth was a shape, a face, or perhaps a potato shaving that looked vaguely face-adjacent. His heart thumped. Was this a saint? A message? A warning? A lost vegetable? He leaned closer. The shape bobbed. The broth shimmered. A faint aura, possibly spiritual, possibly steam, rose around it. He turned to Brother Cedric. "Look, do you see it?" Cedric squinted, tilted his head, grunted. "Yes." Alistair waited expectantly. "It's a root vegetable," Cedric concluded. "No, the shape." Cedric nodded thoughtfully. Ah, yes, that means the cook has arthritis. Alistair sank back in his seat. Perhaps saints had stopped communicating through food, or perhaps the divine, if it had attempted a message, had chosen the wrong vegetable entirely. The third unhelpful sign was even stranger. He was sweeping the chapel floor, an activity perfectly designed to provoke existential dread, when he heard a faint whisper. At first he ignored it. The monastery was old. Old buildings make noises. They settle. They creak. They sigh under the eternal weight of human expectations. But the whisper persisted. Alistair. He froze. His broom slipped. His pulse fluttered like a bird questioning its life choices. He turned slowly. Hello? He whispered into the dim candlelight. Silence. Then the Sauhan whisper again. Alistair. He took a cautious step toward the altar. Yes? His voice cracked like a teenager discovering theology. The whisper grew louder. Alistair. Then, abruptly, Move! You're sweeping my foot! It was Brother Corvinus, asleep, snoring, lying on the pew behind him with one foot extended onto the floor where Alistair's broom had, indeed, been sweeping his toes. A very human explanation, an extremely disappointing one. Corvinus blinked awake. Was I talking? Yes, Alistair muttered. Was it prophetic? No. Pity. Corvinus promptly fell asleep again. The fourth sign involved a candle that refused to stay lit. Alistair noticed it during Vespers. Every time he tried to light the wick, the flame sputtered, flickered, and died. He tried again. Same result. The monks continued chanting, oblivious. The flame tried to ignite, failed. Tried again, failed again. He frowned. Is this symbolic? He whispered to the candle, because at this point he was asking everyone. The candle remained unimpressed. He shielded the flame with his hand, muttering, Come on, cooperate. I am trying to be holy. The candle went out dramatically, like an actor ending a tragic monologue. He sighed. Perhaps this was a metaphor. Perhaps his faith was the wick. Perhaps belief was faltering. Perhaps... Brother Remiel leaned over, blew on the candle for absolutely no reason, and said, It means you are bad at fire, and then walked away. But the universe was not done. That night, as Alistair returned to his cot, he found a small parchment placed neatly on his pillow. At first he froze. A message, an omen, a revelation. His heart trembled. With trembling hands, he unfolded it and read, Please stop humming during chores. It is distracting. Brother Matthias. He exhaled in defeat. This was not mystical. This was interpersonal. Still, the signs continued. The fifth unhelpful sign occurred during a thunderstorm. Rain lashed the monastery windows with apocalyptic enthusiasm. Wind howled like a forgotten saint demanding attention, and Alistair, unable to sleep, sat alone in the chapel. Lightning flashed, illuminated the crucifix. Thunder boomed. Then, a single droplet of water fell from the ceiling and landed on his forehead. One droplet, cold, perfectly centered. A blessing? A warning? A leak? He placed his hand reverently over the spot, shivering. Oh no, this feels significant. He waited. Another droplet fell, then another. Then a full stream of water burst from the ceiling and drenched him completely. It was indeed a leak. Brother Cedric entered moments later, surveyed the scene and declared, the roof is experiencing spiritual fatigue. But the most unhelpful sign of all came the next morning. During sunrise prayers, the chorus of monks droned beautifully, or as beautifully as monks can at dawn, which is to say, adequately. Alistair repeated the verses. Mechanically, his mind tangled in yesterday's chaos. He stared at the stone floor vacantly, until he noticed something odd. A line, a faint line, a crack stretching across the floor directly beneath his feet. It was shaped, if one looked with enough desperation, like a question mark. His breath caught. A literal question mark, on the chapel floor, under his feet, during prayer. Surely this had to be a message, a divine question, a cosmic inquiry carved into stone. He knelt down, touched the crack gently, reverently. Lord, I understand, he whispered. You're asking me something. You're calling me to answer. Brother Cedric, overhearing, glanced down and said, No, That's from when Brother Damien tripped carrying a barrel last winter and cracked the floor with his forehead. Alistair stared. Cedric nodded. The crack suddenly looked very undivine. But the doubt, the ache, the question, did not fade. Because even if every sign had a mundane explanation, why were there so many? Why now? Why him? Why did every coincidence feel like a message wrapped in uncertainty? And so, the signs, ambiguous, frustrating, occasionally ridiculous, piled upon one another until the weight of them pressed against his ribs. The universe was clearly trying to tell him something, or absolutely nothing. But the ambiguity was unbearable. That night, lying awake in the dormitory, listening to the snores and murmured dreams of fellow monks, Alistair whispered into the dark, "If you are trying to say something, could you please say it? Clearly." Silence responded, heavy, breathing, cautious. Then, from the far end of the hall, Brother Corvinus murmured in his sleep, "Bread. I need more bread." Not the revelation he was hoping for, but something inside Alistair shifted, a tremor, a tightening, the feeling, sharp, unavoidable, that his crisis was deepening. The signs had not helped. They had confused, provoked, stirred something fragile. And now the seed of doubt had grown large enough to cast a shadow. Spiritual collapse is rarely dramatic at first. It does not begin with lightning or brimstone or heavenly reprimands written in fire. It begins with small fractures, hairline cracks in the mind, so subtle that even the person falling apart might call it a phase, or temporary exhaustion, or indigestion. Brother Alistair was no exception. The descent into his crisis began quietly. A skipped heartbeat during prayer, a flicker of dizziness while reading scripture, a sudden suspicion that the candles were whispering opinions about him. Nothing overwhelming, nothing undeniable, just enough to make reality feel slightly misaligned. At first he tried to continue his routines. He rose at dawn, as always. He attended prayers, as always. He whispered chants, as always. But something had changed. Before, the chants felt like ancient melodies flowing through him. Now they felt like instructions shouted from a distant room. He could not follow the rhythm. He fell out of sync. He became noticeable. During matins, the monks chanted one line. Alistair chanted another. During lauds, he forgot half the words. During terce, he intoned the wrong psalm entirely. A cheerful one, in a moment meant to be solemn. Brother Matthias stared at him with growing concern. "Are you well?" he whispered. "Yes," Alistair lied. "My voice is simply improvising." "Faith is not jazz," Matthias murmured. Alistair nodded, but inside, something sank. His rituals, once soothing, became treacherous. He could no longer kneel without wondering what truth awaited him in the silence. He could no longer bow without feeling the weight of unanswered questions press against his spine. He could no longer close his eyes in prayer without seeing not light, but shadows swirling like ideas with sharp teeth. The world became louder. The world became quieter. Both at once. He found himself startled by small noises, a page turning, a cough, a broom brushing stone, as if each sound were a revelation he wasn't prepared for. He found himself staring into empty corners, feeling watched by something that wasn't there, or something that was there but too polite to announce itself. He felt, constantly, as though he were on the verge of remembering something important, something forgotten, something forbidden. The descent had begun. The first real break occurred in the scriptorium. He was copying a passage about divine order, a text he had transcribed dozens of times before. His quill moved in familiar strokes, shaping words that had once comforted him. But halfway through a sentence he stopped, mid-stroke, ink pooling on parchment like a growing bruise. The words blurred, not visually, conceptually. "The world is ordered according to God's perfect wisdom." He stared. Perfect wisdom. What did that mean? Perfect to whom? Perfect for whom? Perfect in what scenario? If the world was ordered, why did it feel so chaotic? If God was perfect, why were humans so profoundly incompetent? If divine wisdom guided everything, why had Brother Remiel lost 5 consecutive sandals last week? Alistair felt the parchment tremble beneath his fingers. No, his hand was trembling. His faith was trembling. He lowered his quill and whispered, "This sentence feels like a lie." The room went still. The monks around him continued copying texts, oblivious. But Alistair heard the silence, a new silence, a silence that judged. He tried to keep working. He forced the quill to move. But the ink felt heavier. The parchment felt hostile. His own handwriting looked foreign, as though someone else had guided his hand. He scribbled a correction, then another, then another. By the time he stopped, the page held a frantic, tangled mess, ink like frantic footsteps, absolutely useless. Brother Cedric approached. "Alistair," he said cautiously, "are you editing scripture again?" Alistair looked up, wild-eyed. "No. Yes. Maybe. The words, Cedric, the words, do they ever feel flimsy to you?" Cedric blinked. "I don't read them closely." Alistair's quill snapped between his fingers. That was when Cedric said, with a comforting hand on his shoulder, "You should go outside. Breathe. Touch a plant. Plants are grounding, except poisonous ones. Avoid those." Alistair stumbled out of the scriptorium like a poorly written parable. The second break came the next day. During Vespers, the chapel felt unusually dark. The candles burned lower. The shadows stretched longer. The air trembled. The monks sang, their voices weaving ancient harmonies. But Alistair felt no harmony at all. He felt fragmented, scattered, like pieces of his soul were speaking different languages. He tried to join the chant. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He swallowed. Tried again. Still nothing. His breath faltered. His heart thudded painfully. The room tilted. Suddenly the chant around him felt like noise. Chaotic, overwhelming noise. Every voice a question, every note a doubt. He gripped the pew, hard, knuckles white. He felt as though he was falling through silence. Then, a hand touched his shoulder. Remiel. Of course it was Remiel. The old monk turned toward him and whispered, in a voice soft as dust, "It is beginning, isn't it?" Alistair wanted to deny it, wanted to dismiss it, wanted to pretend everything was fine. Instead he whispered, trembling, "I think something is wrong with me." Remiel shook his head gently. "No, Alistair, something is wrong with your answers." And then he walked away. Alistair sank to his knees, not out of devotion, not out of ritual, but out of an overwhelming need to remain upright in a collapsing world. The third break happened 2 nights later, in the dormitory, long after the others had fallen asleep. The moon spilled its pale light across the wooden floor. Snores echoed like exhausted psalms. Alistair lay awake, staring at the beams overhead, feeling the pressure inside his chest grow heavier, more urgent, more insistent. A thought formed. No, not a thought. A presence. And the presence spoke. Quietly, faintly, unmistakably. "Ask it." He bolted upright. The dormitory was silent. His pulse hammered. His breath rasped. "Who said that?" he whispered. No answer. He pressed a hand against his chest. Felt the trembling there. The hunger. The terror. It wasn't a voice. Not exactly. It was his soul. Knocking. Demanding. Begging to be acknowledged. Ask it. Ask what? The forbidden prayer. The question he refused to articulate. The truth pressing from within. He clutched his blanket, shaking. "I can't," he whispered. "I'm not ready." But the presence, or intuition, or madness, pressed back. "You already are." In the days that followed, the crisis deepened. Rituals betrayed him. Scripture mocked him. Silence pursued him. Dreams echoed him. He could no longer tell where faith ended and doubt began. He could no longer tell if the universe was speaking or if his mind was cracking open like a poorly baked loaf of bread. Once, during evening chores, he swept the floor so violently that dust rose in clouds, catching the candlelight in eerie shapes, faces, wings, symbols, illusions, each one dissolving before he could interpret it. Once, during prayer, he accidentally whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing," instead of "Amen." Once, while scrubbing the reliquary, he found himself asking the skull of St. Florian, "Did you ever doubt? Or were you wiser than me? Or did you simply die before your faith had time to crumble?" The skull, as always, gave no answer, but the silence felt heavier than any response. He felt watched, not by demons or angels, but by truth, pacing, waiting, growing impatient. He felt hollow, yet overfull, a cup overflowing and empty at once. He felt like someone standing at the edge of a great cliff, not ready to jump, but unable to step back. And in the quiet hours of dawn, when sleep refused him and the world was still grey with unmade decisions, Alistair realized he was no longer trying to hide the crisis. He was in the crisis, and it was changing him. There are moments in a person's spiritual life where the soul, exhausted from polite hints, finally snaps and yells through the nearest available crack in reality. These moments do not follow rules. They do not wait for appropriate timing. They do not occur in neat moral lessons printed on tasteful scrolls. No, the breaking point arrives like a door slamming open in an empty corridor. For Brother Alistair, it happened on a night so still that even the candles dared not flicker, as though flame itself paused to witness whatever calamity or revelation was unfolding. The air was thick, the silence was taut, and somewhere deep inside him, the forbidden prayer, still unborn, began clawing at its cage. It began with a vision, or perhaps a hallucination, or perhaps a metaphor throwing itself into reality without permission. Alistair sat alone in the chapel, long after Compline. He had not meant to stay so late, but sleep had abandoned him hours ago, fled into the woods, chased away by doubt. So he drifted here, to the only place where despair at least felt architecturally appropriate. He sat near the altar, shoulders bowed, fingers tangled in his robe, eyes burning with weeks of unspoken turmoil. The candles glowed weakly, as though tired of illuminating crises. Shadows coiled along the walls like hesitant serpents. The silence pressed closer, as if listening. And then, the room shifted, not physically, not visibly, but perceptibly. The way a dream tightens right before the monster enters. Alistair felt it first in the chest, a pull, like someone tugging a thread tied to his heart. He gasped. The air trembled, the candle flames elongated, thin, unnatural, stretching toward the ceiling like souls, fleeing their vessels. "Hello?" he whispered, unsure whether he addressed God, the darkness, or his own failing sanity. No response, only the echo of his voice folding back onto itself. Then, the light dimmed, the temperature dropped, the shadows moved. They did not sway. They moved, deliberately, purposefully, like living things remembering their bodies. One shadow detached itself from the wall. Alistair's breath froze. The shape stepped forward. Not a figure of flesh, but a silhouette of absence. Featureless, lightless, wordless. It stood before him, tall, still, impossibly calm. Alistair trembled violently. Are you an angel?" he whispered. The shadow tilted its head. A gesture, a response, or mockery. He tried again. A demon? Another tilt. This was unhelpful. His hands clenched into fists. "Are you something?" The shadow didn't move, didn't answer, didn't need to. It simply was. A presence, a manifestation, a mirror. Then Alistair heard it. A voice so soft, so internal, so undeniably his own. "Ask the prayer." He shook his head desperately. "I can't." The shadow stepped closer. "Ask." Alistair fell backward, pressing against the front pew. "I'm not ready." "Ask." His breathing fractured. He closed his eyes, opened them, closed them again. "What if the question destroys me?" he choked out. The voice responded, "Then it was not faith holding you together." He collapsed to his knees. Tears, hot, involuntary, slipped down his face. His hands pressed against the stone floor, grounding him to a reality that was beginning to unravel in thin, shimmering strands. "What if God doesn't answer?" he whispered. The voice inside him replied with chilling tenderness. "That is the answer." His throat tightened. His chest burned. His heart felt like it was tearing open along invisible seams. "Then what is the prayer?" he cried. "What is it I'm so afraid to say?" The shadow leaned forward, a gesture of immense gravity. And then, in a whisper that vibrated along the marrow of his soul, it spoke, not aloud, not in words, but in meaning. And the meaning was, "Say what you truly want to know." Alistair stared at the floor, at the cracks in the stone, at the trembling of candlelight trembling in sympathy with him. His lips parted, his voice broke, and he whispered the question that had haunted him since the dream, the parchment, the signs, the silence. God, are you there, or am I just talking to myself? The moment the words left him, the chapel changed. The candles extinguished simultaneously. A pulse, deep, cavernous, shuddered through the air. The darkness thickened, swallowing the edges of the room. Alistair's heart hammered. His body shook violently. He felt as though the universe itself had inhaled him. Then, light flooded the chapel. Not warm light, not divine light. A cold, indifferent, overwhelming brightness that illuminated everything without revealing anything. It was the kind of light that answers no prayers and exposes all fears. He lifted a trembling hand, shielding his eyes. "Is this you?" he cried. The light did not flicker, did not soften, did not respond. Instead, a low, resonant sound filled the room. A hum, a vibration, a trembling note that felt like existence humming in its sleep. Alistair heard it as 1,000 possibilities. Yes, no, maybe, irrelevant. Look elsewhere. Stop asking. Ask better. He felt himself unraveling. His mind fractured into too many thoughts. His soul felt stretched. His breath faltered. He screamed, not in fear, not in pain, but in overwhelming, unbearable clarity. His faith, beautiful, fragile, ornamental, was breaking. He collapsed onto the floor, hands over ears, eyes closed, chest heaving. The light pulsed once, twice, and vanished. The darkness returned. Natural darkness, normal darkness, human darkness. The candles reignited one by one, as though embarrassed to have been extinguished. The chapel was quiet, still, empty. The shadow was gone. The voice was gone. The light was gone. Only Alistair remained, collapsed on the stone floor, crying silently, his soul cracked open like a vessel dropped from heaven's clumsy hands. He whispered, "Broken?" I asked, and nothing answered. The silence around him was painfully tender. Then, from somewhere far away, from the dormitory hall, Brother Corvinus called out sleepily, "Who turned on the bright light? I was dreaming about bread." That was the final absurdity. Alistair sobbed harder, a hysterical, exhausted, half-laughing sob. "Nothing," he whispered into the stone. Nothing answered, and maybe that is the answer. He curled into himself, trembling. In that moment, utterly alone, utterly shattered, utterly honest, he realized something painfully sacred. Nothing is more spiritual than failure. Nothing is more divine than the question that breaks you. Nothing is more honest than the silence that remains. His crisis had reached its peak. His faith, or the illusion of it, had cracked. But something else had cracked open with it. Something waiting, something powerful, something terrifying, something that would guide him into the stillness that follows storms. Silence after a spiritual collapse is not true silence. It is a presence, a weight, a texture. It feels like someone scraped the world clean of sound and left only the residue, the ghost of noise waiting to be reborn. Quiet becomes something you can touch, something you can bruise yourself on. Brother Alistair awoke wrapped in that kind of silence. He didn't remember falling asleep. He didn't remember leaving the chapel. He didn't remember how his body found its way back to his cot. He only remembered the light, and the question, and the nothingness. When he opened his eyes, dawn had begun slipping into the dormitory with shy, grey fingers, touching the wooden beams, the rows of blankets, the curled forms of monks still, dreaming untroubled dreams. Brother Corvinus snored peacefully beside him, utterly unscarred by existential collapse. Alistair inhaled. The air felt heavy, dusty, unsettled. It tasted faintly of ash. He wondered if something inside him had been burned during the night. He rose slowly, like an old man discovering new gravity. His knees ached. His chest felt hollow. His mind felt bruised. He walked through the corridor, each footstep echoing louder than it should, as though the stones were amplifying him in an attempt to understand the fragile creature they carried. Outside, the morning light spread over the courtyard, illuminating dew on the grass, each droplet a trembling star too small to grant wishes. He stepped into the cool air. For the first time in weeks, the world did not feel like a riddle. It felt blank. Blankness can be terrifying, but it can also be merciful. He sat on a bench beneath the old walnut tree that had been there longer than memory. Its bark was cracked, lines like wrinkles carved by centuries of wind. A few leaves trembled in the breeze, whispering their indifferent lullabies. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, indifferent to theology, indifferent to crisis, indifferent to monks shouting forbidden questions into the void. For a long time, Alistair simply sat. He was not praying. He was not thinking. He was not avoiding anything. He was simply resting. The exhaustion of spiritual collapse settles deeper than physical fatigue. It lingers in the metaphorical joints. It sits behind the ribs. It wraps itself around your thoughts like a cloak. He closed his eyes and let the silence settle on him like dust. Dust. Yes, he felt dusty, not dirty, not impure. Just dust, as though his faith had been shattered into grains too small to reassemble. Perhaps that was fine. Perhaps faith had always been made of dust, pretending to be stone. Later, in the refectory, the monks gathered for breakfast. The meal was simple. Bread, porridge, humility. Alistair sat among them quietly. No one noticed anything unusual about him. That was the strange part. He felt transformed, hollowed out, scraped clean. Yet externally he was still Brother Alistair, moderately devout, moderately odd, moderately forgettable. The porridge steamed gently in his bowl. He stared at it, unmoving, as though waiting for a revelation to rise from the surface like a saint emerging from soup. Nothing happened. He found this comforting. The absence of meaning, when embraced, can feel like mercy. Brother Matthias finally nudged him. "You're quiet today," Matthias whispered. "I'm listening," Alistair replied. "To what?" Alistair looked around the refectory. The low murmur of spoons against bowls, the soft rustle of robes, the faint clatter of wooden benches. "Everything," he whispered. "Or maybe nothing." Matthias blinked. "Are you all right?" "No," Alistair said softly, "but it's peaceful." Matthias stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as though deciding the crisis was not severe enough to interrupt breakfast. After the meal, Alistair walked toward the chapel. He entered quietly, gently, as though the room was still grieving something. The candles burned low, not flickering this time, simply steady. The air was still thick with the scent of wax and yesterday's terror. He stepped inside and listened, not for voices, not for signs, not for divine guidance. He listened to the emptiness, and for the first time, the emptiness didn't frighten him. It felt like a room, no longer hiding anything, the place where revelation ends and honesty begins. He sat on the same pew where he had collapsed the night before. He touched the stone floor where his tears had fallen. The stone was cold, indifferent, ancient, older than his doubts, older than his monastery, older than the entire concept of prayer. He whispered, "My God, what was that last night?" The silence responded with its usual wisdom. It offered no explanation, no comfort, no condemnation, but something had changed within him. He no longer expected an answer. He no longer demanded one. He was simply speaking truth into the quiet, letting it mingle with the dust. In the days that followed, Alistair moved through the monastery like someone learning to inhabit a newly emptied room. He completed his chores without urgency. He attended prayers without expectation. He walked through the cloister garden without searching for symbols in the shapes of leaves. Ironically, this made some monks think he had entered a phase of profound enlightenment. "He looks very serene," Brother Cedric whispered to Remiel. "He's dissociating," Remiel replied. "Is that holy?" "In moderation." The crisis had hollowed Alistair out, but not in despair, in clarity. His mind was quieter now. Not peaceful, just quieter. The constant buzzing of questions had dimmed. The pressure in his chest had eased. The trembling in his hands had stopped. But something else emerged in its place, an unsettling calm. A calm that felt neither divine nor delusional. A calm that felt like weather after a storm. Not restored, not healed, simply rearranged. Every morning, he found the sunrise softer than before. Not kinder, just softer, as though the light had lost its urgency. Every evening, he found the shadows less threatening, not comforting, simply predictable. He walked through the monastery as if rediscovering textures: rough stone, warm bread, cold water, wax dripping like tired tears. He felt gratitude for small, physical things, not because they were sacred, but because they were not symbolic. He no longer looked for meaning in accidents. He no longer hunted for signs in random events. He no longer strained to hear God in the silence. He let the silence be what it was, silence. And silence, once accepted, begins to reveal its subtler tones. Breathing, pausing, listening. Not answers, but reminders. Reminders that the soul can rest, even in uncertainty, even in emptiness, even in the aftermath of spiritual implosion. One evening, as the sky dimmed into shades of muted gold and charcoal, he whispered into the garden, "Maybe I don't need certainty." A breeze stirred the leaves, not significantly, not symbolically, just naturally. He smiled faintly. And maybe, neither do you. He did not know whether he was addressing God or the tree. Both seemed acceptable. This was the silence after the storm, not peace, not revelation, but the quiet, trembling awareness that something new was coming, something ambiguous, something fragile, something he would not yet name, not a return to faith, not a loss of it, something else, something that hums between belief and disbelief, like a candle flame deciding whether to stay alive. There comes a moment, always unexpected, always inconvenient, when the universe leans close and whispers something that may or may not be meaningful. It does this for its own amusement. It does not clarify. It does not repeat. It simply drops possibility like a pebble into a deep well and invites you to interpret the ripples. Brother Alistair was about to receive such a pebble, though receive may be too generous a verb. Collide with is closer. Accidentally trip over while half awake might be the most accurate. It happened on a twilight that felt undecided, hovering somewhere between dusk and night, as though the sky itself were hesitating. The monastery bells had rung for vespers, echoing long and lonely across the fields. The air smelled of incense left over from evening prayers, mingled with the earthy scent of damp stone cooling under the fading light. Alistair walked slowly through the cloister garden, each step gentle, each breath careful. He was not afraid. He was simply attentive. After the storm of his crisis, this attentiveness had become a habit, not a desperate searching, just an open awareness, like a window left cracked during rain. Something might drift in, or nothing. Either was fine. He sat on the old bench beneath the walnut tree, its leaves whispering with that soft authority possessed only by ancient things, which, in monasteries, includes most of the furniture and all of the monks. The sky deepened. The breeze quieted. The shadows gathered politely around the column bases. Alistair exhaled, long and slow. His soul felt calm in the way broken things become calm, because the shattering is over. What remains is rearranged. As he sat there, he whispered, not a prayer, not exactly, but something adjacent to one. If you're there, I'm listening. If you're not, I'm still listening. The silence responded with the confidence of something that had no intention of clarifying its position. He smiled faintly. That was when he saw it. A flicker, a small one, on the far side of the garden, near the old statue of the archangel with the missing sword. At first, he thought it was firelight, maybe a candle someone had left outside, but the flame seemed too pale, too delicate, too hesitant to be real. Then it drifted, floated, not high, not dramatically, just enough. A soft, glowing sphere of light, no larger than a plum, hovering near the statue's base. Alistair blinked once, then twice. "Ah," he murmured, "this is either something sacred, or I am profoundly hungry." He had skipped dinner again. That complicated matters. The little light flickered gently, pulsing like the breath of a sleeping creature. It drew closer, bobbing in slow, almost shy movements, like a timid firefly that had accidentally evolved into something theological. Alistair rose, slowly, deliberately, as one approaches both miracles and hallucinations. The light hovered before him, trembling, silent, expectant. He extended a cautious hand. "It would be helpful," he whispered, "if you clarified whether you are real." The light, of course, did not. Instead, it moved toward him until it rested, softly, impossibly, against the palm of his hand. Warm, very warm. Alive? perhaps. Or perhaps he simply had a fever. The glow brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again. A rhythm, a pulse. He felt something stir inside him. Not fear, not joy, not divine awe. Something more unsettling. Recognition, not of the light itself, but of the feeling it triggered. Something like déjà vu for the soul, as though he had encountered this moment before, long ago, in a dream he'd forgotten, or a memory that hadn't happened yet. He closed his fingers slowly around the glow. "What are you?" he whispered. The light responded by doing something deeply unhelpful. It collapsed into itself, folding, shrinking, folding again, until it became a single point, a speck, barely visible. Then, without warning, it popped. A soft sound, like a bubble bursting, or a whispered syllable, and it was gone, just like that. No explosion, no revelation, no angel descending with a checklist, just absence. Alistair stared at his empty hand. That, he said aloud, was either profoundly meaningful or aggressively pointless. The walnut tree rustled, offering no clarification. He sank back onto the bench, rubbing his forehead. "Well," he sighed, "if that was divine, it needs better communication skills." He leaned back against the trunk, exhaling deeply. His heartbeat steadied. His breathing softened. The air settled around him with a sort of patient emptiness. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time behaved strangely around ambiguous revelations. Eventually he rose and returned to the chapel, drawn not by need, but by instinct. The chapel was dark except for a single candle flickering at the altar. Just one. Small, quiet, unexpectedly stubborn. Alistair walked toward it. The flame leaned toward him as if acknowledging his presence. He watched it flicker, not like flames usually do, but in a pattern, a rhythm, almost, like blinking. He knelt, not out of devotion, out of curiosity. "What do you want from me now?" he asked quietly. The candle flame flared, bright, sharp, sudden, then dimmed to a thin, trembling line. Alistair stared at it, deeply unimpressed. "Oh, come on," he muttered. "I just had an encounter with a glowing bubble. If this is another metaphor, please keep it simple." The flame snapped sideways. A small spark leapt from the wick. It landed on the stone floor and fizzled into nothing. He frowned. Was that a yes? Or a no? Or... The candle flame suddenly extinguished. Darkness. Complete. Immediate. He waited. Nothing. No vision. No voice. No cosmic hum. Just the quiet breathing of a chapel that had opted out of further participation. He sighed. Well, that was an unhelpful sequel. He stood slowly and left the chapel. Outside, the night sky spread above him like a vast, silent scripture written in stars no one could decipher. He looked up. "What do you want?" he asked softly. "An offering? A sacrifice? A better question?" The wind brushed his cheek gently, like a hand without form, like an answer without words. Or perhaps it was just wind. He closed his eyes. The night pressed closer. In the darkness behind his eyelids, something shimmered, a faint afterimage of the little floating light, or the echo of a thought he wasn't ready to think. He felt something shift inside him, not a revelation, not clarity, not certainty, just movement, a stirring, like the first ripple forming on the surface of a deep, still lake. Maybe the divine had spoken. Maybe his mind had invented a symbol. Maybe hunger had staged a coup. He did not know. He did not need to know. What mattered was the feeling, the soft, ambiguous, trembling feeling that something was changing. Something was becoming. Something was waiting for him to name it. He whispered into the night, "If that was you, I don't understand." The silence responded with equal honesty. He smiled faintly. "At least we're consistent." He turned, walked back toward the dormitory, and wondered, just for a moment, if the revelation was real, or imagined, or irrelevant. Perhaps it was all three. Perhaps it didn't matter. Ambiguity, after all, is the oldest language of the sacred, and tonight it had spoken to him. Or he had spoken to himself. Either way, the effect was the same. Something inside him had awakened. By the time morning returned, Brother Alistair had made a quiet, radical discovery. Life continued, Not in a triumphant way, not in a transcendent way, just persistently. The bells still rang, the monks still shuffled, the porridge still tasted vaguely like regret, the sky still changed colors every few hours without asking anyone's permission. Somehow this offended him and comforted him at the same time. If the universe was indifferent, it was at least reliably indifferent. He moved through the day slower than usual, like a man, walking through water, or through the leftover pieces of his previous certainty. No one else saw the pieces, of course. They just saw a monk with slightly softer eyes and slightly slower steps. He went to prayers. He sang the words. They didn't feel like lies, but they no longer felt like guarantees either. They were offerings, gestures, fragments thrown toward a mystery that refused to introduce itself. That day, while other monks busied themselves with chores, Alistair wandered. Not aimlessly, not purposefully, just wandering. He passed through the scriptorium and paused at the doorway. The scratching of quills on parchment sounded like insects writing the minutes of a meeting no one would ever read. Rows of texts lined the shelves, sermons, commentaries, treatises, explanations upon explanations. So many words written to explain a silence that never answered back. He stepped inside and ran his fingers along the spine of a thick volume, feeling the dust collect on his skin. Each book claimed to know something about God. None could prove it, and yet they existed, and the monks copied them, and the pages multiplied, ink spreading like vines in a garden of uncertainty. "Are they all wrong?" he whispered, almost to himself. Then, after a pause, "Or are they all slightly right, and mostly lost?" Brother Cedric glanced up from his desk. "Are you talking to the books again?" "Just the dust," Alistair answered. "Dust is trustworthy," Cedric said, nodding. "Dust doesn't exaggerate." Alistair smiled faintly, then left. In the courtyard, he found Brother Remiel sitting beneath the old walnut tree, eyes half closed, hands resting on his knees as if he were guarding nothing in particular. "You look quieter," Remiel said without looking up. "I feel emptied," Alistair replied. "Emptiness is a very advanced spiritual state," Remiel said, "or a symptom of anemia. Hard to know." Alistair sank beside him. "I asked it." Remiel didn't move. "Asked what?" "The question." Remiel's fingers twitched once, like an old memory waking up. "And?" "Nothing answered," Alistair said softly. "Ah," Remiel murmured. "That one." They sat together in silence, listening to the sounds of the monastery. Distant chanting, a clatter of dishes, a crow complaining somewhere on the roof. After a long while, Alistair asked, "Have you ever asked it?" Remiel smiled, a slow, tired smile that made the wrinkles around his eyes look like folded parchment. "Many years ago," he said. "And?" "Nothing answered," Remiel echoed. "Of course." "So, what did you do?" Remiel shrugged. "I washed my hands, fed the chickens, continued not understanding anything but with less enthusiasm." "That's it?" Alistair asked. "That's it," Remiel replied. "What did you expect? Trumpets? Footnotes?" He tilted his head toward Alistair. "Did you feel tricked?" "Yes," Alistair admitted, and also oddly relieved, like I'd finally asked the one question my faith wasn't strong enough to answer, and now it knows. "Faith hates being honest," Remiel said calmly. "It prefers costumes." "And what do we do?" Alistair asked. "When the costumes fall off?" Remiel looked at him with something almost like tenderness. "You live," he said. "You pray, if you can. You stop pretending certainty is the same as devotion. You learn to love the God who may or may not be there, and the soul that may or may not be heard." "That sounds exhausting," Alistair whispered. "Oh, it is," Remiel said. "Deeply. But it's also strangely bearable." They sat together a while longer, two monks under a tired tree, sharing a silence that for once didn't feel hostile. The day thickened. Shadows stretched. Obligations called. Eventually Remiel rose. "Come. If we're going to not understand the infinite, we might as well do it on time. The abbot hates late confusion." Alistair followed, yet something inside him resisted returning to the old rhythm entirely. He could walk through the same halls, complete the same tasks, recite the same words, but something in him refused to pretend the world was as simple as before. That refusal was small, but it was alive. and it would not go away. That evening, during Vespers, he noticed something strange. Not outside. Inside. The chants rose. The monks sang. The candles flickered. Everything looked exactly as it always had. But for the first time, he felt two things at once with equal intensity. He did not know if God was listening. He wanted to pray anyway. That wanting surprised him. It wasn't born of fear, not fear of hell, not fear of punishment, not fear of cosmic abandonment. It wasn't born of habit either. Something in him simply leaned toward whatever might be there, or toward the possibility that nothing was, and that longing itself was holy. He whispered his part of the psalm, voice thin but steady. "O Lord, hear my voice." And somewhere in the back of his mind, another voice murmured, "And if you don't, I will still speak." That quiet defiance lodged itself inside him like a glowing coal. After Compline, when the others drifted off to sleep, he returned once more to the chapel. It had become a reflex, the way a wounded animal returns to the site of its injury, cautious, wary, curious about the scar. The night wrapped the chapel in layers of shadow. The air tasted of burnt wax and breath. One candle remained lit at the far end, a tired sentinel stubbornly holding its post. Alistair knelt, but not as before. Not in performance, not in panic, not even in hope. He knelt because standing felt inappropriate. His hands rested loosely on his thighs. His eyes gazed at the floor. There were no rehearsed phrases on his tongue, no carefully structured prayers, no bargaining. He breathed. In, out, in, out. The silence greeted him like an old acquaintance who still refused to say what they were thinking. He cleared his throat. "All right," he whispered softly. "Let's be honest with each other." He paused. The candle flickered. "I asked you if you were there," he continued, "and you didn't answer. Or you did, and I can't understand. Or there's nothing to answer. I don't know which possibility is worse for my pride." His lips curved into a tired smile. "But here I am. Again. I'm not sure if I'm praying to you, or to the idea of you, or to the part of me that needs there to be a you." He laughed quietly. Possibly all three. He felt no lightning, no glow, no voice, only the quiet ache of saying something true. "I don't know what faith is anymore," he murmured. "Maybe it isn't certainty. Maybe it isn't comfort. Maybe it's just continuing to speak into the silence without demanding that it owe you anything in return." A thought surfaced, slow, hesitant. "Maybe," he whispered. "The one prayer we're all too afraid to say is not, 'God, are you there?' but 'God, I will still be here even if you're not.'" The words landed between him and the altar, heavy, soft, irreversible. He stared at them, invisible but undeniable. Was that blasphemy? Surrender? Devotion? Madness? He didn't know. He suspected the line between them was thinner than he'd been taught. He sat there for a long time, suspended between absence and presence, between hope and resignation, between needing an answer and learning to live without one. His chest did not feel as hollow now, not full, not healed, just occupied. By what? He couldn't say. Eventually his legs numbed, his back ached. The body remembered its limitations before the soul remembered any doctrine. He rose with a small grunt. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. On the step below the altar, almost hidden in a crack in the stone, a faint shimmer. He bent down. It was so small he almost missed it. A tiny droplet of wax, hardened into a shape that resembled a teardrop, with a faint, barely noticeable gleam, as though the last light of the extinguished candle had gotten trapped inside it. He picked it up gently. It was warm, not hot, not miraculous, just warm. He rolled it between his fingers, squinted at it, exhaled. "All right," he said softly. "You're either a metaphor, a coincidence, or nothing at all. I'll let you be whichever you like." He put the little wax tear in his sleeve. It didn't feel like an answer, but it also didn't feel meaningless. It felt like a question that wasn't threatening anymore. He stepped out of the chapel and into the corridor. The monastery slept, wrapped in shadows and soft breathing. Somewhere, Brother Corvinus murmured in his dreams about bread again. Someone coughed, someone rolled over. The world went on with or without clarity. As he walked back toward his cot, he realized something else. His faith hadn't vanished. It had changed shape. It no longer stood tall and confident like a tower. It lay scattered, humble, like coals in a fire that had burned down. No flames, no spectacle, just embers, small, glowing, stubborn. He didn't know if those embers would ever reignite into something like his old belief. He didn't know if they would dim into ash. He didn't know if they wanted anything from him at all. But he knew this. He could sit with them. He could tend them. He could let them exist without forcing them to become what they used to be. He lay down in his narrow cot. The droplet of wax rested in his hand beneath the blanket, warm against his skin. His last thought before sleep was not a prayer. Not really. It was more of a half-ironic, half-sincere murmur. Whatever you are, or aren't, we'll talk again. The silence tucked him in. No revelation, no final word, no conclusion. Just the gentle, maddening, strangely comforting possibility that God was there, or wasn't, or was something he had no words for yet. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough for now. After all, he thought drowsily as he sank into sleep, maybe God was busy, or just avoiding messages, like every Monday. The darkness smiled, or he imagined it did. Either way, he finally rested. In the oldest corner of St. Corvinus Monastery, the corner where dust settles with the confidence of a long-term tenant, where spiders weave theology in silk, and where silence grows thick enough to slice, there lies a single wooden pew that creaks ominously when no one is sitting in it. It creaked now, not from spirits, not from saints, simply from age, which is its own kind of haunting. Dawn had arrived in its usual half-interested way, spilling pale gold across the stone floor, as though someone had shattered the sky and forgotten to clean up the light. The chapel glowed faintly. The air tasted of wax, cool stone, and unsupervised incense. Brother Alistair entered quietly. He walked with no urgency, no heaviness, no fear, only that fragile, unfamiliar calm that had begun to grow around him like a cloak woven from ashes, and the softest possible clarity. He sat on the old pew, which groaned under the weight of his existence, politely, but with judgment. He placed his hands on his knees. He stared at the flickering candles. He breathed. He was not praying, or perhaps he was, in the way trees pray by growing and rivers pray by moving, unintentionally, without script, without applause. Something had shifted in him permanently. He was no longer begging heaven for answers. He was no longer performing certainty for himself or others. He was no longer chasing signs the way hungry men chase metaphors in burnt toast. He simply existed in the presence, or absence, or something in between. The world had become softer after the breaking. Not kinder, just softer, as though its edges had blurred. His faith, no longer rigid, no longer ornamental, rested inside him like a small ember refusing to die out of sheer stubbornness. The forbidden prayer, the one medieval monks had feared, avoided, and buried beneath centuries of ritual, had been spoken, not loudly, not triumphantly, but honestly, and honesty, as it turns out, is more powerful than any miracle. He whispered now into the echoing stillness, "I asked if you were there." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the strange tenderness of truth. I didn't receive an answer. The chapel breathed around him, stone settling, wax melting, candles sighing in flame. He added with a faint, ironic smile, "But I'm still here, and I think that's enough to continue." He rose slowly, feeling his knees protest, a reminder that even spiritual revelations cannot fix aging joints. He walked to the altar and placed the little hardened droplet of wax, his strange, wordless souvenir, at its base. It glimmered faintly in the morning light, as though remembering it had once held fire. He touched it gently. "You can stay here," he murmured. "Or not. I suppose that's always been your way." He turned away, leaving the wax teardrop nestled in the crack of the stone. It looked holy in a way that only meaningless objects can become once someone assigns meaning to them. He stepped out into the cloister corridor. His sandals whispered against the cold stone. Dust rose in soft clouds beneath his steps. Brother Remiel was waiting there, leaning on his cane with the posture of someone who had lost the argument with gravity years ago. You look different, Remiel said. Do I? Alistair replied. Yes, less haunted, more untethered. Is that good? Remiel shrugged. Depends on your definition of sanity. They walked together toward the courtyard, where a thin mist curled around the herb garden like confused incense. Tell me, Remiel said, after everything, what do you believe now? Alistair hesitated, not out of fear, but out of reverence for the undescribable. I believe, he began, then stopped. He tried again. I believe that belief is porous, and doubt is not a curse but a doorway, and silence. He looked up at the sky, pale and expectant. Silence may not be an answer, but it is certainly a presence. Remiel nodded approvingly. Very poetic, deeply unhelpful. You'll make an excellent mystic. They walked on, steps slow, quiet, meditative. Across the courtyard, Brother Cedric waved at them. Breakfast is ready. Porridge again. Today it looks existential. Every day, Remiel muttered. Porridge looks existential. Alistair smiled. He felt light, not free, not enlightened, just light enough. The crisis had not destroyed his faith, nor had it restored it. It had changed its shape. Faith was no longer a wall he leaned on. It was something softer, quieter, an unanswered question he held carefully, like a candle flame cupped in gentle hands, a question that warmed him even as it refused to resolve. He entered the refectory. The usual chaos greeted him. Monks arguing over butter distribution, Brother Corvinus claiming to have dreamt of prophetic bread again, novices dropping spoons like nervous acolytes of gravity. Alistair sat. A bowl of steaming porridge waited before him, grey and unenthusiastic. He studied it. I will not, he said gently to the bowl, look for signs in you today. The porridge bubbled once, ambiguously. He ate. He existed. The monastery existed around him. And somewhere beyond the walls, or within them, or nowhere at all, God, or the idea of God, or the absence that shapes God's outline, listened, or didn't. Either possibility felt strangely holy. Later that evening, after the day had thinned into its last quiet hours, he returned to the chapel to extinguish the candles. The light faded one by one. Soft, breathing darkness filled the room. Dust shimmered like forgotten prayers. Only one candle remained lit. The stubborn one, the one that had flickered strangely the night of the bubble-light apparition. He approached it carefully. The flame trembled, as if aware of its own mortality. He whispered to it, "Thank you." Then he blew it out. Darkness settled around him. Not empty, not frightening, just dark. He stood there a moment longer, letting the silence fold around him like a slow, contemplative cloak. Then finally he spoke his last words into the night. If this story kept you awake a little longer, if it stirred something ancient or fragile or terribly human in you, then maybe you belong here too. He stepped back, reached for the door, and added with a soft, ironic bow, "Subscribe to Religious Night Stories, where faith never sleeps, even if you do." And the darkness, ever patient, ever listening, closed behind him with the quietest exhale.